You know, when I came out on the public sphere and first talked to Sam, I had this sort of axe to grind in some sense, which was my belief that the fundamental framework from within which we see the world isn't and can't be objective. And I still believe that's true, but I was hammering it home because I wanted to win that argument. And that wasn't the most sophisticated way of going about it. Well, less and less, I think, as we talk. I don't want to win an argument. I don't want to have an argument. I want to ask him questions. I want to find out what he thinks, because Dawkins is no fool.
Great.
And his atheistic materialism, grounded in his evolutionary thinking, like, that's powerful. You know, it's a powerful system of thought, and he's a master of it. And so I want to find out what led him to the conclusions that he came to. And I have questions for him. You know, I want to talk to him, for example, about the instinct to imitate, because you were talking earlier about something that unites us, you know? So imagine this, for example. You know that the same person can be admired by a lot of different people, even people who differ in their political beliefs. And that admiration sort of captures them. That's charisma. That's part of charisma. The charisma is part of an instinct, right? Because if I think you're charismatic, and then I'm going to watch you more, and my eyes are going to point to you more, I'm going to be more likely to do the things you do. I'm more likely to imitate you. And so I would say there's something like a central spirit that we're all driven to imitate. And it's the thing that we see as admirable across people. Yeah. And that points to something that we experience as religious. So like the ultimate expression of that which compels imitation is indistinguishable from religious worship. It's not propositional.
Yeah, well, that's a Vervaekean argument.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and Vervaeke's one of the people who's thought this sort of thing through in most detail. Yeah, well, I think Pageau's super smart, man. He's deep, and the same with Vervaeke. Those two, they've taken certain forms of thought farther than anybody I've ever met. Vervaeke is so well read, it's terrifying. And Pageau is this weird character because he really understands postmodern thinking. Yeah. Well, you see, well, that's part of having an artistic temperament too. You know, people like that who are more open in trait terms, they can see patterns in things. Now, that can lead them astray because you can project patterns into, you know, the void, let's say, that aren't there. That's conspiratorial thinking, for example. But intuitive people who are also capable of critical thinking pick up patterns long before anyone else does. I've had graduate students like that, you know. They would leap to a scientific conclusion that was dead on multiple times, and then when they were writing their papers, they'd have to fill in how they got there. Well, that wasn't how they got there. They leaped from mountaintop to mountaintop using Nietzsche's terminology, and they could see patterns, and then they had to construct a rational story to publish their ideas in scientific journals. It's so funny because it's a form of falsification, right? That isn't how they got there. And so I started thinking about this, for example, when I was watching my kids play house. So my son would act out the father, you know, he'd be the father, but he wasn't imitating me exactly. He wasn't mimicking the exact gestures of my body, right? Like I do this, well, I'm imitating you right now. But if I was a comedian and I wanted to parody you, I would imitate your spirit in some sense, right? And then put a twist in it and everyone would laugh. So I can abstract out from you your pattern. Well, then imagine we're way better at it than that. Like if I watched 10 admirable men and was gripped by my admiration for them, let's say I was fortunate enough to have 10 admirable men in my family, I could abstract out the central spirit that makes them all admirable, and I could imitate that across generations. And so now partly what occurs is the imagination formulates the representation of the abstraction. So I'll give you an example. So if you look, and you often see this in Byzantine cathedrals. So you look up in a Byzantine cathedral, it's a dome, so that's the sky. And maybe you'll see an image of Christ up there as Pantocrator, right, creator of the world. And this is sort of tied with the idea that consciousness gives rise to reality. So it's an idealistic philosophy or experience. Well, the idea is something like that the thing to be admired. It's the central phenomena and function of consciousness, and in some sense it gives rise to the reality that is good itself. And the imagination gets there way before the propositional philosophers.